What if the person who behaves like they don't need you at all is actually the one who thinks about you the most once everything goes quiet at night? What if the one who pulls away the hardest is the very same person lying awake, replaying every small moment they shared with you again and again? Stay with me here, because what I'm about to walk you through can completely change the way you see avoidant behavior. And if you've ever gotten close to someone who seemed to run from your love, this might hit deeper than anything you've come across before. Before we keep going, drop the word night in the comments below, and if you haven't subscribed yet, come join us. We're still growing, and every bit of support truly counts for more than it seems from the outside. Now let's keep going. So what really happens inside an avoidant person when they miss you? And not the version they'd ever say out loud or even admit to themselves. I'm talking about the private moment they go through once the world finally settles down, once there's no noise, no distractions, and nothing left to escape into except their own mind. One thing people often get wrong about avoidant people is assuming they feel less. In reality, they feel just as deeply, sometimes even more intensely than others do. The difference is that over time, they've built an inner system that treats emotion as something unsafe. Needing someone becomes tied to danger. Missing someone feels like cracking open a door to loss, so they learn to close that door before it ever fully opens. That belief doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It's usually formed early in life. Maybe love felt unpredictable. One moment it was warm, the next it vanished. Maybe emotional needs were brushed aside, ignored, or met with irritation. Crying wasn't met with comfort, it was shut down. Vulnerability wasn't welcomed, it was pushed away. So their nervous system adapted in the only way it knew how. It concluded that needing people means pain. And so the safest path forward was to stop needing anyone, to become self-sufficient, self-contained, emotionally out of reach. Over time, this wasn't just a behavior they performed, it became something they genuinely believed was their true identity. So when someone starts getting close, something inside them gets triggered, a kind of alarm, a pressure they can't quite explain. It tells them that closeness always ends in loss. So the safest response is to create distance first, and that's precisely what they do. They pull back, they go silent, they become distant, they make excuses, stress, timing, confusion, needing space. And meanwhile, the person who cares about them is left wondering what they did wrong. But most of the time, you didn't do anything wrong at all. You simply got close to the exact place their old defenses were built to protect. And this is usually where most explanations stop. But this is actually where the real truth begins. Because what happens after they push you away, or after you finally stop reaching out, or after yet another night passes where they act completely unbothered, it's very different from what most people assume. When the day winds down, when distractions fade away, when the phone stops buzzing, when work is done and silence takes over, something shifts inside them. At first, it doesn't even resemble missing you. It shows up as restlessness. They can't settle into anything. They move around without any real purpose. They check their phone, set it down, pick it back up again. Nothing feels satisfying, yet they can't quite name what's bothering them, and honestly, they avoid naming it, because naming it would mean facing something they've spent years trying not to feel. So they distract themselves, they scroll endlessly, they watch something without really absorbing it, they try to fill the silence with anything that keeps them from turning inward. Sometimes that works for a little while, but then something small slips through the cracks. A song plays that reminds them of you. A random post shows up that you would have found funny. A thought crosses their mind, and their first instinct is still to send it to you. For one brief second before their guard goes back up, they feel that pull, that quiet emotional gravity pulling them toward you. And that feeling itself is what unsettles them, because in their internal world, longing isn't just longing. It feels like exposure, and exposure feels like the beginning of pain. So they cut it off. They redirect towards something else right away. They might text someone else, not because that person means more to them, but because connection, even shallow connection, softens the intensity of what they're feeling. They might open dating apps, not out of genuine desire, but out of a need for control, because choosing something gives the illusion of power over their emotions, even though nothing actually changes. This isn't moving forward, it's managing discomfort. But underneath all of it, something quieter keeps happening. A part of them is still thinking about you, not the loud, conscious part, not the part they'd ever admit to anyone. It's the quieter layer buried beneath everything else. And once night falls, that layer becomes more active. Because at night, avoidant minds tend to replay rather than reach out. They usually don't picture a future with you. The future feels too unpredictable, too emotionally risky. Hope opens doors they aren't ready to step through. So instead, their mind travels backward, back to what already took place. Because the past feels safer. It can't hurt them the same way anymore. So they replay moments. Not the dramatic ones, not the fights or the tension, but the quiet ones. The ones that slipped past their defenses without any warning at all. The sound of your laugh when you weren't trying to impress anyone. A pause of silence that somehow felt comfortable rather than empty. A conversation that went deeper than they expected and left them a little exposed. The way you looked at them in a way that felt like they were truly seen, not just the version of themselves they usually present to the world. These moments don't just fade away for them. They stay tucked in places they rarely visit during daylight hours. But at night, when things quiet down and their guard softens just a bit, those moments come back. They don't reach out, they don't say anything, but they return there anyway. And then they do something else, something quietly more painful than most people ever fully realize. They check on you without ever actually contacting you. They look at your social media, they watch your stories, they visit your profile over and over. Not to interact, not to reconnect, not to open a door back into your life, but simply to know, to confirm that you're still there, still living, still moving through your days, still okay, as though that small digital glimpse could somehow ease the emotional distance they themselves created. Even when they were the ones who walked away, even when they were the ones who caused the silence, they still keep looking, because what avoidant patterns often conceal very deeply is this contradiction. They want connection, but not exposure. They want closeness, but not vulnerability. They want access to you without having to face the emotional risk of being fully seen or fully involved again. So they remain stuck in this strange in-between space, not inside the relationship, but not entirely outside of it either. They hover, they watch, they circle your life from a safe distance. And then they try to minimize what they're doing, at least in their own mind. They tell themselves it doesn't mean anything, that it's just curiosity, that they're only checking in, that they've already moved on, that they're fine, that none of it affects them. But none of those excuses really hold up once everything goes quiet. Because when night comes, something shifts in their inner world. The distractions that usually help them stay disconnected start to fade. The noise of the day disappears. The phone stops demanding their attention. Work is over, conversations end, and suddenly they're left alone with the very thing they usually avoid. And in that stillness, everything they buried throughout the day begins to rise back up. At first, it doesn't come through as clear emotional language. It doesn't arrive as "I miss you" or "I want you back." It comes in waves of restlessness. They can't fully settle down. They shift positions. They check their phone without any real reason. They scroll without any real purpose. They open things and close them right back up. Nothing feels satisfying, yet nothing feels obviously wrong enough to explain either. And this is part of what makes it so confusing for them, deep down inside. The feeling is real, but it isn't organized. It has no label. It's simply there. And because avoidant conditioning teaches them that emotional clarity leads to vulnerability, they often avoid even trying to define it. Naming it would make it too real, too direct, too close to something they've learned to fear. So instead, they distract themselves once again. They reach for anything that puts distance between them and their own inner experience. Videos, social media, conversations that don't ask for any real depth, anything that keeps them from sitting too long inside their own emotional space. But even distraction has its limits, because something small always breaks through. It could be a sound, a song, a phrase, a random image, a memory sparked out of nowhere. And suddenly there you are again in their mind. Not as a full story, but as a moment, a fragment, a feeling. Maybe they remember how easy it felt talking to you in a certain moment, or how safe a particular silence felt, or how you looked at them when they weren't performing or protecting themselves. These aren't dramatic memories, they're subtle ones, and that's exactly why they linger. For one brief second, their emotional walls drop just enough for them to feel that pull toward you, and that pull is what creates the internal tension. Because for someone with avoidant patterns, emotional pull isn't experienced as simple longing. It's experienced as risk, as a loss of control, as potential exposure. And in their internal system, exposure has often been tied to pain. So the moment that pull shows up, they cut it off. They redirect, they reach for something else, another screen, another conversation, another distraction, sometimes even another person, not because that connection matters more, but because it creates emotional noise that drowns out the quiet intensity of what they just felt. From the outside, this can look like detachment or indifference, but internally it's usually management, regulation, a way of avoiding being overwhelmed, not an absence of feeling. And still, underneath all of it, the part they try hardest not to engage with keeps existing. You're still there in their mind, not constantly, not dramatically, but in fragments, in quiet returns, in moments that surface when their guard drops, and as night deepens, those fragments start connecting. This is where the mind slips into replay mode, not toward the future because the future carries risk, uncertainty, and emotional exposure. Instead, it moves backward, toward what's already happened, toward what feels safer because it can no longer be changed. They replay moments with you, not the loud or tense ones, but the subtle emotional ones that slipped past their defenses. A moment where laughing felt effortless, a conversation that went deeper than expected, a silence that never felt awkward, a moment of feeling understood without having to over-explain, a sense of being truly seen, something they aren't used to. These moments don't vanish for them. They stay tucked away in emotional memory, even if they rarely revisit them on purpose. And at night, when their guard softens, those memories rise back to the surface. This is also where something more complicated shows up: emotional conflict. Because alongside the longing, there's often frustration too, not aimed outward at first, but inward. A quiet, self-directed tension. An unspoken awareness that they walked away from something that mattered more to them than they let themselves fully feel. There's often a part of them that questions their own patterns, a part that notices the repetition, a part that grows tired of the distancing, tired of restarting, tired of landing in the same emotional loop over and over. But insight alone doesn't create change, and that's one of the hardest truths in all of this. Understanding what they feel doesn't automatically change what they do. So they stay divided inside. One part reaches out, one part pulls back, one part craves connection, one part fears it, and instead of resolving that tension, they learn to exist inside it. That becomes the cycle. And if you're watching this happen from the outside, it's incredibly easy to fall into the painful belief that if you just explain things better, love harder, stay longer, respond differently, or become more patient, the pattern will finally break. But this is exactly where clarity matters most. You cannot love someone out of an avoidant pattern. You cannot be steady enough, soft enough, or understanding enough to replace their internal coping system. That system wasn't built around you. It was built long before you ever entered the picture. Their withdrawal isn't a measure of your worth. Their silence isn't proof that something's wrong with you. Their inability to reach out, even when they clearly feel something, isn't a reflection of how meaningful the connection is. It's a reflection of conditioning, of emotional survival learned over time, of a nervous system that links closeness with danger instead of safety. And once that system switches on, it overrides intention entirely. So the loop keeps going. They feel close, then they step back. They miss you, but they don't reach out. They check on you, then go silent. They remember you, then push the feeling away. They suppress it, then reset. And then the next day starts, and the whole pattern repeats itself again. Over time, this builds a relationship dynamic that feels like motion without progress, emotional presence without emotional continuity. And if you're caught inside that dynamic, the most important shift isn't learning to chase better or read them more accurately. It's learning to stay grounded in yourself while all this uncertainty continues. Because when your emotional world starts revolving entirely around someone who's inconsistent, you slowly lose your own center. You begin tracking their behavior more closely than your own needs. You start reacting instead of living. You start waiting instead of building. And that's exactly where exhaustion begins. A healthier way to see it is this: connection needs two people who are both willing and able to stay emotionally present. Not perfectly, not non-stop, but consistently enough that the relationship has some real stability. What actually builds trust with someone who leans avoidant isn't emotional intensity or constant pursuit. It's steady presence, the kind that doesn't overwhelm and doesn't vanish either. A kind of consistency that quietly says, I'm here, but I haven't lost myself in this. That kind of presence doesn't force change. It doesn't guarantee attachment. It doesn't control the outcome. But it does create something important. It creates the space where change becomes possible, only if the other person is willing to face their own patterns. And that willingness is the one thing no one else can hand them. Being someone who says what they mean and means what they say. Someone who doesn't suddenly shift tone or vanish emotionally without any explanation. Someone whose warmth, attention, and consistency aren't controlled by the other person's push and pull. That kind of stability leaves a quiet impact on an avoidant person, even if they never say so, even if they never respond the way you're hoping for, even if it feels completely unnoticed. It isn't unnoticed. It's simply reaching a part of them that isn't open enough yet to fully respond. The next layer of all this is how you express your own emotions inside this dynamic. Avoidant patterns often shut down in the face of emotional intensity because their nervous system reads it as overload, not because your feelings are wrong and not because you're too much, but because sudden emotional escalation can feel like a loss of control to them. So when conversations get heavily charged, when emotions spike too fast, when things spiral into cycles of crying, frustration, or pressure, what usually follows isn't deeper connection, it's withdrawal. That doesn't mean you bottle up what you feel. It means refining how you communicate it so it can actually land. You can be completely honest without becoming overwhelming. You can say, I miss you, without turning it into, I need you to fix this right now. You can say, this hurt me, without turning it into, you always do this, and nothing ever changes. The emotional truth stays exactly the same. What shifts is the delivery, and that alone can completely change how it's received. Because for avoidant people, it's often not the emotion itself that pushes them away. It's the intensity and pressure surrounding it that becomes hard to process.